Hello everyone and welcome to this Austmine Mets Tech Talk. I'm Sheldon Varco, Membership Manager, New South Wales and South Australia here at Austmine. And sorry about that, it's just a new update to the job title. So Manager International Projects at Austmine. And I'm pleased to be your host for the session today. Before we begin, I would like to start by acknowledging that I'm hosting this webinar from the lands of the Gurungai people. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you all work today, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people attending this webinar. Next slide, please. Today's webinar will look at the emerging solutions and processes helping to create lasting value for communities and stakeholders of mining organisations. This webinar is the first tech talk focusing on social value within our ESG series. In previous webinars, we've explored environmental trends, challenges and technologies relevant to mining in this space. And in the last edition, we had a fantastic panel discussion that examined the key social issues for our industry. You can view all the recordings and register for further webinars via our website. Next slide, please. For this webinar today, we have 4 fantastic tech talks focusing on various solutions within the social value space, from design for growth, AAM, Voconic, and RWDI. Our speakers today will present solutions encompassing areas such as strategies for effective community and stakeholder engagement, providing a voice for communities and feedback to mining organisations, the use of geospatial tools for community value, and looking at reducing air quality impacts from operations as well. Following the tech talks, you'll have the opportunity for audience Q&A. You can submit any questions via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and you can also upvote on any questions you would most like answered. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Christine Charles, Managing Director at Design for Growth, for our first presentation of today's session. Welcome, Christine.
Thanks very much, Sheldon. Look, I'm going to just talk about why we are worried about engaging with our stakeholders, some ideas on how you might actually get some skills and bring those into your business, and then a bit about the next steps. So to start off with, I thought I'd discuss the business case. I mean, why do we worry about it? We know that right from exploration and access to land, that sets the tone for what happens next. So often a challenge at the exploration end in terms of capability, but regulators are actually looking for companies to effectively understand the communities that they're in, respond appropriately and manage the risk. So it's important for approvals, and we know that if you do it well, your approval process is faster. Positive relationships with your communities actually means that there is likely to be less disruption to business. You have support for project development, and often this is part of your workforce, the local communities, and hopefully this would lead to successful closure. Key steps in doing this is actually to take the time to actually understand who is around you. Now, stakeholders are people that can have impact on your project or may be impacted by your project. And that is across a varying degree to mine affected communities that are very close to operations, through to often people in capital cities that have a view about projects and may have a political voice, even if they're not immediately impacted. Developing an engagement plan and recognising how close and how strong the concern or the interest is from a stakeholder perspective is actually a key part of you actually then working out how to respond, as well as looking at your activities and saying what disturbance or impact or could that actually have on the people surrounding it, and how do I look at it from their perspective. The diagram that I've got up, could you go to next slide, and then next slide, please? Yep. Really says there is a whole range of things that people think of when we think of engagement. You know, so sometimes I sent out a newsletter, I held a town hall and we told people things, right through to we've actually sat down and listened and actually answered questions and responded. And probably at the more involved end, we've not only listened to people, we've actually asked them to contribute to our design and our thinking. And a lot of regulators now actually expect that not only do you identify the impacts that your project might have, you listen to the community's concerns, and that the final designs actually reflect a response to those risks as perceived by community. The other thing to note is that over time, both stakeholder groups and their level of interest and support and or concern may change. Next slide. So in thinking about this, and the smaller your concern, the less likely you are to have onboard skills. I think of a BHP and a Rio, then they have specialist skills in this area, but often also for particular projects are looking for targeted skills. The sort of skills that you want in actually understanding the community, being able to understand the risk, how to respond appropriately, cover things like stakeholder mapping and analysis, an understanding of First Nations perspectives, social impact assessments. Have you identified the issues that your project may rise or the concerns that people have? The risk assessment and management process, social and political environment mapping, understanding how this social part fits into the regulatory framework. Often our projects, when they go through approval processes, are actually quite strong on many of the technical elements, but are not sure where a social impact assessment is necessary or how they actually capture the concerns of the community and show the pathway that's actually affected design and management decisions. Local employment and local contracting is often a feature of commitments that are made, and they are again specialist skills that are available. You often don't necessarily need those internally for a long time, but certainly at the planning and development stage, you need them, and strategic communications. And I might say communications is actually quite a different skill set to community engagement. Next slide, please. Next slide. Oh, we're on to the next slide, sorry. Company sorry, that's the one. I was looking at my own screen, apologies. So part of this is actually looking at our own capability. And in the community space, we often focus on whether a community has the information or the skills or the leadership to engage, but this is very true within our own companies. So really asking the question of whether the board has an understanding of the issues, whether senior management not only understands it, but is actually supporting policies and management systems. Building and growing specialist capability within your company and or ensuring that you've got access to it. What you can't measure, usually you can't deliver. So really asking what KPIs you're going to develop. So what success looks like, and training, including cultural competencies, will all position your company to be able to deal with these issues. Final slide, please. And look, my final comment would be that social license is a term that's often used to actually say you have the support of the community, but it's not a license in the sense that you've got it forever. This is something that you need to continue to pay attention to and adapt over the development and operation of your project or business. It can be lost very quickly and then is very hard to regain. So investing in a very disciplined, informed approach, recognising there are tools and techniques about how you do this better, will absolutely build trust in the work that you do, and I think will be at the heart of your long-term success. And back over to you, Sheldon. That's social license in a nutshell.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot for that, Christine. And I really appreciate you presenting there first. I think that provides a great lead in, and we'll delve down further into some of these areas with some solutions and tools out there in the industry that can be utilised for social license. So thanks a lot for that, Christine. If anyone has any questions, please pop those through the Q&A box. I'd now like to welcome our next presenter. So Rolf Fendrich, who's the Business Development Director and co-founder of Voconic. And Rolf will be discussing a science-based pathway to social license fueled by community voice. Thanks, Rolf.
Thanks, Sheldon, and thanks, Christine, for the excellent groundwork. My name is Rolf Fendrich. I'm from Voconic. Voconic is a data science and social performance advisory company based out of Brisbane and and that operates globally. In this tech talk, I'd like to present our solution that is changing the way the global resources sector manages social risk, hence the title, a science-based pathway to social license fueled by community voice. Next slide, please. So firstly, the problem being addressed by our technical solution as articulated in this quote. This senior exec tips millions into community every year and is not getting the outcomes he needs, and he doesn't know why. So he's missing the point somehow. Next slide, please. So again, more about the problem and in particular its magnitude. Most people would be familiar with this annual study conducted by EY, ranking the risks that managers deal with. So again, in 2022, social license and social risk is way up there in terms of its ability to keep senior execs in the global mining sector awake at night. So it's pervasive, and the fact that it's been in the top 5 for so many years means it remains unresolved. Next slide, please. So our solution for improved management of social risk is called Local Voices, and it's one that places community with their voice at the centre. The very voice of the source of any potential costly consequences when mining companies get it wrong are placed at the heart of the solution. And when wrapped with science and technological processes, the framework delivers better outcomes for industry and community. So through this design, with community voice integral, the solution facilitates building lasting value for community. Next, please. Our process looks like this. We embed the process with community and the operations staff, both those working directly with community, but also wider management team. It's about making the processes very transparent and clear, so all stakeholders are very confident with Local Voices, with how it operates and what is being achieved. This is essential because it's in there for the long haul. Next, we use various ways to conduct surveys to gather our raw data. So we capture community voice, and we use methods that are appropriate for the context, whether it's online surveys, whether it's via phone, whether it's face-to-face, or even analog mail-outs. We seek to engage with the most effective way to collect high-quality data. Then we use sophisticated quantitative modelling with the data collected to explain and predict what a social license to operate is. So I'll go into that in the next slide. Lastly, we share those results through interactive dashboards, allowing users to engage with the data so that they really explore the insights within. Some of this data can also be made available to community in a process that we call closing the loop. That's a very important part of Local Voices, and it keeps it alive within the community. Next slide, please. So now to the science that is activated by the Local Voices process. This is our trust model, and it's a quantitative characterization of the relationship taking place between community and the local mining operation. This model is known as a path analysis, and it is populated by the raw results, the raw survey results of the anchor survey. So the initial deep dive survey in the Local Voices process. The model delivers not only what community think about what's happening, but also why they think that way. So it's a recipe for social license to operate that is specific to that context, that is that community next to that operation at that point in time. The model can then show you where to invest to improve the relationship and prioritise the limited resources to achieve maximum benefits. So a bit about the path analysis. On the right is acceptance. So that's our proxy for a social license. In the middle is trust. And on the left, you can see the drivers of trust. And there are just 4 examples of some common drivers of trust. The arrows indicate the direction of the relationship, and the coefficients represent the strengths of that connection. And the valence of the coefficient, either positive or negative, indicates its nature. So does this feature erode, then it's negative trust and acceptance, or does it build it? So in that case, it'll be positive. So the next slide, please. So after the anchor survey and our analysis and identification of those principal drivers of trust and acceptance, we then go back to community members and only ask them about those principal drivers in short pulse surveys. So it's only asking them into the future about what's been established that is truly material. During this phase, this is where local voices introduces a temporal dimension for social performance measurement. That is, we now have near to real-time tracking of social performance. So with this feature, social performance and community relations specialists working in mining operations, whether at site on the ground or within a HQ function elsewhere, they now have access to the same tools that all the other professional disciplines in the industry enjoy to manage their respective risks. So that is real-time, ongoing, structured data grounded in science. Next slide, please. So here's an example of a dashboard that we produce from the data. So key to any new data is to ensure that the insights from that data can be translated easily into action to deliver impact. So we work very hard to make sure local voices reporting has real utility and leads to action. So back to that executive on the first slide, local voices delivers the point that he was missing about his social investments. So in this particular example here on the screen of local voices of the dashboard, you can see the user is exploring sentiment data across the demographic of age group to see what insights can be discovered in that particular aspect of the data. So the next slide, please. So the benefits of this science-based social performance framework are enjoyed by many industry stakeholders, not least of all the community, the local community itself. Their voice can now be directed directly into decision-making spaces of industry, and thus community can be brought on a proactive journey at every stage of an operation's life to ensure value, as they see it, is being built. Thanks very much, Hayley, for the slides, and back to you, Sheldon.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot for that, Rolf. And that's an extremely valuable tool for mining organizations and other organizations in the industry as well, to really get a grasp on what the community sentiment is. So thanks a lot for that. We have some great questions coming through for Christine and Rolf. And if anyone else would like to submit questions, just put those through in the Q&A box. Moving on now, so I'd like to introduce Anthony Boyd, the Account Manager, Mining and Resources at AAM. And Anthony's going to discuss how geospatial technology can enhance community value. Thanks, Anthony.
Thanks, Sheldon. Hi, all. Yeah, as Sheldon just said, it's a smart use of geospatial technology to enhance community value. So next slide, first slide, thanks. On the agenda is geospatial technology enables value creation, clearer vision and current potential impacts. I'll show a few case studies from concept to closure and beyond, and then lasting value created. Next slide, thanks. So AAM at a glance. This illustrates a few things of what we do. So It ranges from capturing geospatial data via remote sensing technology. So we have LiDAR and imagery along with bathymetric LiDAR through to underwater surface hydrographic surveying, through to land-based surveying, laser scanning, BIM models, the ability to use different platforms in UAVs and drones, and then ultimately to GIS services and consultancy and products such as digital twins. So we follow a full gamut of not only capturing the data, analysing the data, but also visualising the data. Next slide, thanks, Hayley. So geospatial technology enables value creation. Geospatial information plays a key role in mine planning, operating and remediation. And we can target, assess and model mines and conditions at any point in time. That helps with mine permits and licenses, mine models and site visualisation. Spatial control and networks to complete site control, analyse benchmarks and for compliance and environmental impacts. We also monitor assets and risk potentials on site. Also monitor infrastructure, along with stockpile and volume management for any auditing and reporting basis. This normally happens on a monthly basis for the mines. We also conduct water management and storage capacity determinations, and then also as-built surveys, right through from start to finish. So we can do an exploration site right through to process closures and plan reclamations. Next slide, thanks, Hayley. So for a clearer vision of current and potential impacts, AAM provides the geospatial tools that support better decision making for the mining and resourcing sector. So this can be, as mentioned before, for aerial photography, whether it be 3-band imagery or 4-band imagery, that's in red, green, blue aspect, or a near infrared is that 4th banding aspect that allows tree health analysis. Airborne laser scanning, otherwise known as LiDAR, and that is scanning of the surface of both ground and non-ground layers. High definition surveying and monitoring. We can also do it on the ground, as mentioned before, through our surveyors with terrestrial laser scanning. We provide GeoCirrus Mine Viewer application that allows an easy-to-use web-based platform that can view road compliance in this instance. Bathymetric surveys allow for water management and tailing storage facility management. And all this processing is done by our own trademarked software called LiDARnetics, which allows artificial intelligence and machine-based learning LiDAR processing. So once we capture data, then on towards delivery, we can turn around the required products in anywhere between 12 hours to 48 hours, depending on client requirements. Next slide, thanks, Hayley. So with our regular terrain definition, it increases efficiency in the mine planning, monitors benches against the mine plan, allows us to monitor and spoil heaps against the mine plan. Stockpile reporting allows for audit contractual payments to mine operators. We can recalibrate weighbridge measurements and check the safety and stability on embankments, along with subsidence monitoring and detect illegal mining. Next slide. Further to the regular site mapping, it allows independent report activities to government, reliable report activities to mine owners, environmental monitoring purposes, increase efficiencies in the site management, and record activity to defend future actions, along with confirm activity remains within the mining leases. Next slide, please, Hayley. As for our bathymetric surveys, we check stability of the dam walls, we manage volume capacity of the dam storage, evaluating risks from being flooded from any upstream catchments. We plan how to best divert water flows. We can plan to best harvest and store water, and we can show the best ways to plan for best way to release water. Next slide, please. So our Geocirrus Mine Viewer for road compliance was a collaborative project amongst several Tier 1 miners. The testing and evaluation was conducted across 9 open cut mines across Australia. The accumulation of approximately a year's worth of development, along with continual improvement. As you can see in that image there, it's basically a cloud-based web application. It's scalable, so it has unlimited processing potential, and it's accessible via the desktop miners in the office to laptops and even on your mobile phone out within the field. So essentially, it is a digital twin, so it applies analytics along with the design information provided by site as to what road grades, road widths, benches, all this sort of stuff can be analysed. It's taken obviously on a specific time from the aerial survey, and it's a combination of all spatial information of LiDAR and imagery. Some governments across Australia make this a requirement in the road compliance to ensure basically the workforce and ultimately the community are safe. Next slide, please. Another case study is the Hunter Valley Regional Ortho photo we do on a 2-year sort of basis. Every 2 years we update. It's up to 300 square kilometres of 15 centimetre based imagery. The available data set allows to show the relationship between the current coal mines in the Hunter Valley and their respective townships of Scone, Muswellbrook and Singleton. Imagery also shows that the community or the end user can show the impacts in the region over time. It's a product that we actually find that we provide to a fair few real estate agents in the Hunter Valley. They find it a very useful tool. Next slide, please. Generally, some of our aerial surveys of both simultaneous LiDAR and RGB imagery are conducted at ports around Australia. This data can be utilised to allow the operators and the community to assess and analyse dust monitoring. Another aspect that we provide is mining offset areas where these areas where there's no mining allowed allows for rehabilitation programs for flora and fauna. So we can monitor that on a regular basis. Next slide, please. And final case study is a mine rehabilitation portal that was set up. IAM supported the build of the portal that allows the miners and to upload all their information into one centralised database. So you can go from start right through to finish at each prospective mine site. Next slide. So the lasting value it's created for over 60 years, IAM have been assisting the mining and resource sector. It reduces human impact to the certain sensitive areas. It helps create a safer work site and community. It uses local staff and suppliers where possible, and the monitoring and reporting on the asset and environmental conditions reduces the risk and prevents any further problems. It enables smarter decision making by providing actionable intelligence for all stages of the mine. That's the next slide. Yeah, done. So if there's any questions, thank you for your time. Yeah, I think we'll leave it to the end. Isn't that right? Yeah, leave it to the end of the chat. Yeah, perfect. Thanks very much.
Great. Thanks a lot for that, Anthony. It's really good to see how I guess tools that have been used in the mining industry for quite a while have increasingly been used for environmental and social purposes. So thanks a lot for providing some of those case studies in how they're being implemented as well. I'll now move us on to our final presentation. So I'd like to welcome Kevin Petty, the Director of Operations Australia and New Zealand at RWDI. And he'll be discussing noise and air containment emissions. Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks, Sheldon, and thank you everyone for your time today. So as Sheldon mentioned, we'll be sort of diving a bit into the impacts of noise and air contaminants and how they impact our local communities. It's pretty something that there's been a number of these things raised from nearby port facilities to mine operations and the like. If you go to the next slide, please, Haley. So I guess why do we need to think about these things? We need to really understand how things are going to progress in the future. A lot of the nearby communities are growing. Near mine operations, there's already a lot of mine facilities that are nested in amongst nearby communities, or communities are built around those facilities for the workers. So how do we see how those future impacts are going to affect things? And how do we predict that? A big part that sort of historic has always done is there's a lot of EPA requirements and the like that we need to be able to meet. So make sure the facilities are actually meeting their obligations. So while that's a handy thing, it's also beneficial to see how do we improve operations so that we're reducing our impact on our surrounding nearby neighbours, also the environment. We go to the next slide, please. So the first question really needs to be asked is, do communities actually care? And I think, we're all becoming more and more aware that yes, they do. And there's a couple of different reasons or different ways things are being overlaid. Firstly, I think a big part is it's being aware that it's not just in terms of a regulatory requirement, but how does it affect our Indigenous people? That these mine sites are really impacting both sacred sites, but also the communities that are based or could be based near some of these facilities. I think our younger generation become increasingly aware also of the impact of different processes we do throughout the mining process itself, and how that does affect the future world that they'll be living in. And it's becoming more and more important, the international, the corporate pressure. So how investments are actually placed in some of these operations, and obviously will they be sustainable going forward as well? So the obvious simple thing is, firstly, we have one type of emission, it can be dust, noise, and the like, and affects a community. But the bigger talking point now is about how a combination of a large number, so the greenhouse gas emissions affecting our world as a whole, which is then indirect or directly affecting a number of communities, as opposed to just one source, a local source, so to speak, affecting a local community. Go to the next slide, please, Haley. So ways that RWDI go about this, so we look at a large number, basically look at the effect of the environment, so considering things like wind, air quality, noise, you name it, we sort of look at the impacts that the world can make. So one part we can look at is we can estimate the emissions that might be coming from a source. It could be from a stack or an operation or the likes. So we can estimate if we take measurements if we have known sources. We can overlay that in terms of the local met. So if you think about when we have a dust, there could be an air quality, so an exhaust source or even a noise source. They're actually impacted by the local environmental conditions. So wind will blow things in a particular direction and then impact different aspects. And obviously the wind climate is a variable entity. And even going from one site to the next due to topographic effects and the like, we need to really account for that. And if we can operate and know what those direct impacts will be, maybe blowing towards, if I take this example here, blowing a particular direction, do we need to start thinking about how we actually operate our facilities so we don't impact these communities? And then obviously we could definitely measure the impacts and validate things against the future forecasting. Go to the next slide, please, maybe. So in a simple overlay, what that looks like. So first of all, we can look at the background concentrates. So what's there at the moment from either a noise source or an air quality source or greenhouse gas. Generally, a lot of things, there's a number of things happening around it. So what are nearby facilities or items sort of impacting the local environment, and what's our facility going to impact. We can then model that, and we overlay methodology on top of this to understand how these sources will actually be blown around to nearby areas and hence impact our communities. Go to the next slide, please. So I sort of touched on before, but a big important element is we can look at the climate for an area. Sometimes we'll take a climate file, for instance, but a climate file will be for a specific area. And if I take New South Wales as a simple example, if you look at the wind climate, say for instance from Sydney Airport, right on the coast, heavily governed by coastal breezes, so our northeasterlies and our southerlies. We start moving inland, and we start all of a sudden seeing those coastal effects change. If we go up or down the coast, and there's big differences. Down Wollongong, you get a completely different climatology, especially when we think about things like Mount Ousley and the likes, which actually generates its own sort of climate cell. And then we go up to the Hunter, once again, different wind direction, we're going to govern a lot of those parts. So what we could do is, RWR have a detailed MET team in-house, and we actually look at firstly, what is it from a global scale, and really pull it down, actually, when we talk about here, the occupant scale, but at the site itself. And we can look at sort of what's it been historically doing, but more importantly, what's it going to do into the future? So you do a lot of future forecasting of the impacts of climate change or future development of the area, or even the variance in a mine operation, which will impact the wind climate hitting that site as we change the landscape itself. So this is a really important aspect, because it's one thing to take a climate file. If we don't get this first element right, the rest of it will struggle. Go to the next slide, please. So this feeds into things like when we think about greenhouse gas. So one part is we can estimate what those future will be. Now, these could be based off the design of the facility. What we estimate will be the actual operation or the emissions coming from a facility. If we have an existing facility or the one that's already in place at that site, we can measure that. And then furthermore, we could back calculate. So we could look at both forecasting and hindcasting. So when we hindcast, we look at and say, well, we're predicting this is going to happen in the future. We know different events that have happened in the past. How do we validate and calibrate the model to actually get greater accuracy and make sure we actually know what we're doing, to then actually feed in and make sure we're getting the best outcome or reduction in guidance for the design of these facilities. Next slide, please. Now, it's not always easy to get all the data in there. So this is sort of a bit of an overview of how we might think about these processes. So think about a stack facility as one example. You go on site, you can measure the data at the stack. We know exactly what's coming out. Great, we can feed that in and we can model that. Sometimes that's not always possible. So we could look at some metered sources in terms of gas consumption, historical electricity usage and emissions from greenhouse gas emissions. We can estimate future projections. There might be individual usage that we could sort of collectively combine to have some combination factor for what those fuel emission sources might be. Otherwise, we could have some rough usage estimates as a starting point, and obviously as we progress, we can overlay monitoring to actually recalibrate or realign, make sure we're getting the best and correct output to actually guide future decisions. You go to the next slide, please. So that's what I probably think about in terms of air quality and greenhouse gas. But I guess what about noise? And there's a couple of different parts that affect noise. One is, if I take down the bottom left graph here, there's a range of noises that exist in the community. If we go to another context, you got a lot of that city noise type thing. You go to a more country setting, it's actually nearby, well, it could be animals, could be winds interacting with the bush itself. There are different noise sources, but we can actually do a spectral analysis to understand what is the noise that's causing it. Is it from the facility itself that we have in mind? Is it driving and going to impact a nearby receptor? Is it a time period that's going to impact central sector, so like residents and the like, or communities? The bottom right is sort of an interesting one where it's a measuring device called a bar now, which RWDI developed, and it actually is a directional noise sensor. And the reason that's critical is when you have multiple different noise generation sources in a nearby area, being able to understand, is it from our operations that's causing a local community to have issues? Is it something else? So essentially, do we have control to actually try and reduce that? Or is it outside control? And then it can help localize what might be a cause or an issue with that. We can obviously measure some of this data as shown on the top left, and we can have different criteria. This is something we feed into the operators themselves on site, which can then understand, hang on, we're breaching some of these limits in the nearby area. We need to, turn down the operations and the like. But what's even more advantageous is we can look at the weather forecasting. So the top right shows an example here of what the weather patterns are going to be. And if we know what's going to be into the future, usually you get reasonably good accuracy for the next 3 or 4 days, which we have done for a number of sites. We can then help predict and help align. So maybe it's a certain time when we back off operations because we know it's going to impact a nearby community, or another time when the weather conditions are more favourable, and then we can ramp things up accordingly or leave things operating as needed. And next slide, please, David. And that's all I have time for today. So thank you very much for listening. I hope that gives a bit of an insight as to how we can consider noise inequality for our communities. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot for that, Kevin. Yeah, some great case studies and technologies they're used for monitoring of those different emissions. And we now have just a couple of minutes left for audience Q&A. So I'll run through these, and if I could please ask the panel just to keep, I guess, responses to a minimum. There's also been some replies through the Q&A box as well, so those in the audience can have a look at that. I might just start with a question which does go to the whole panel, but I might start with Rolf because you put a response in here. So someone has asked about if mining organisations are implementing solutions that focus on ESG issues, or if costs, efficiencies, etc., production are still the main focus for mining organisations. So over to you, Rolf, for that one.
Right. Yeah, so our focus is on the S in ESG, and as I showed in my slide, it's way up there in terms of the risks that are concerning the C-suite within mining industries. It's a very current topic at the moment. People might be aware of a lot of the discussion about ESG across the globe and all the standards that exist and all the rating systems and all the ways people are trying to use data to manage respective ESG risks. Nobody more famous than Elon Musk, brought it to the world's attention where Tesla was ranked much lower than someone like Exxon. So there's a raging debate about these rating systems and how that's all being done. So, but we aim to bring the rigor that science brings to systematically measure how companies are performing in the social space and help them elevate their ability to manage that risk by equipping those people that are charged with managing that risk with the right tools and the right information and the right understanding about the relationships they're having with community to improve them.
Excellent. Thanks a lot for that, Rolf. And Christine, I think you put a comment here through the Q&A as well. So did you have any notes on this one?
Yeah, sure. Look, I think the reality is that companies are driven by business outcomes, and one of the challenges is they often can't see the pathway to a clear view of engaging with community, and how that is relevant to the business. So I think part of the specialist advice you can get is actually putting it in the business frame, right? If you don't address these things, it's like explorers getting access to land, but doing it in a way that upsets so many people, it's actually quite hard to develop it. So one of the things that we notice is actually using corporate language that sometimes feels a bit foreign if you're talking to communities, but actually put it in the context of you're managing this risk, it gives you this benefit, it actually gives business continuity. So, I think that's actually a challenge to us because, the bottom line still has to measure up, and we need to be able to demonstrate the value of the things that we're recommending that you actually do. So, yeah, sometimes I think it's very much a kind of, language problem as well as what people think their drivers are.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a great point, Christine. So thanks a lot for that. Kevin, I might just come over to a question here from you that's just come through. So just asking around different software for modeling of emissions forecasting.
Yeah, no, I'll start at the top. I thought it would be easy to answer normally. So in terms of, I guess it's a series of parts. So one part is if we look at the weather itself. So RWI does all the future forecasting in-house, which then drives all of these. And this can range from we're monitoring or forecasting some of the airport operations, tower crane operations, a lot of port facilities as to when they might do load transfer between ports. In terms of the emissions, it comes down a bit of a challenge. Sometimes if it's an existing facility and you're not sure, so we can go and actually measure what we know the source of emissions might be. And that can range from sort of water bodies to actual mine operation sites and the like. There's obviously a big talking point around some of the satellite measurements around methane emissions from some of the coal facilities. We're actually discussing that at the upcoming Consensus conference. Where you can do a series of monitoring nearby to measure a certain thing with a known met climate, and then also overlay that with the modelling software. Some of this is in-house stuff that we've developed over the years, leveraging both the monitoring data and our own sort of forecasting and back predicting, so the hindcasting side of things. One of my colleagues actually was involved in the development of some of the current now industry standard practices for dispersion modelling. So there's a range of different sort of ways you can go about it. The hardest part is if you know the data, that's great, we could go from there. Otherwise, it's about actually doing some measurements. There's a lot of stuff that we either get out of the ground or we're emitting from operations. The unknowns aren't there.
Excellent. Thanks a lot for that, Kevin. And just before we finish up, I might just come to this last question from Jenny because I think it's an important one. And I see Christine and Rolf are typing some answers, but I might come to you guys over the line. So Jenny asked where it's just disappeared. Yeah, where would I become more credentialed to advise my company on ESG issues or developing messaging skills around ESG?
Do you want me to start?
Yeah, that'd be great.
So, I have to declare an interest because I chair the advisory board at the Centre for Social Responsibility in Mining at the University of Queensland. But with the Minerals Council of Australia, that was one place that, short courses, certificate courses right through to masters have been developed in the community relations and a whole lot of aspects, human rights, with a specific focus on the mining industry, but a number of other groups have actually developed quite good courses in this. So I know AusIMM has actually been running some courses. There's, other groups. There are also opportunities to actually do, very short courses that are not necessarily credentialed. So you kind of need to know whether you're looking for a qualification or the skills, and, it might be both. But certainly, I think if you go online and just actually type in community relations in mining, you'll be surprised at how many are on offer. And, in all things, I tend to point you to the ones that actually have industry engagement, because there are some commercial advisors, providers that I think don't necessarily understand the mining industry.
Excellent. Thanks a lot for that, Christine. And I see in the Q&A box there, Rolf's backed up your thoughts there about the AusIMM course as well. So that provides Jenny there with some relevant links to go on from there. That is all the time that we do have for today. So I'd like to thank the panelists for giving their time to the webinar today, and also all of the attendees. Before we go, so the next webinar in our ESG series is focusing on employee health and safety. So that's on Wednesday, 14th of September. Some great tech talks there from Damstra, Creative Pipeline, Ethos Health, and MyPass. So looking at a range of technologies that enhance workforce safety and health, especially from a digital technology perspective. So thank you to everyone who's attended today, and we look forward to welcoming you to the next Austmine webinar. Stay safe, everyone.